Master, the tempest is raging, the billows are tossing high. The sky is overshadowed with blackness, no shelter or help is nigh. Canst thou not that we perish?
Today we are continuing chapter 3.
Allison Blevins.
Oh,
Sorry. I'm trying to get to your screen.
He
I like
still
your screen.
hasn't learned.
No, it's muted. It's muted. But I'm trying to get to that screen, and I got to it, so we're good.
There you go. Good job there.
Thank you.
Proud of you. We are continuing in James chapter 3 today. Last week we got through the section on the tongue, the first 12 verses, and we're going to be starting in verse 13 today. Let me get my papers all settled here. So back at the beginning of this book, at the beginning of our study of James, James chapter 1, he talked about people being teachers and the greater responsibility they have. And then he had a little bit of a discussion about wisdom and knowledge. And he kind of revisits that topic. He's had this digression about the tongue and about how we use it and about faith and works and those type of things. And he's bringing all those ideas together. Kind of what happens here. He starts to wind it up. We're getting toward the last half of the chapter or of the book here. Verse 13 says this: "Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom." Now, this is one of those verses to me, Dale, that seems like a proverb. There's a lot in this one little verse to discuss. He's talking in chapter 1 about teachers and wisdom and knowledge, and now, okay, who among you? He's preached a sermon for a couple chapters, and now he's coming back and saying, okay, who among you fits this description I've been talking about? Who among you is wise and has understanding? I like how he does that. And then he brings in his discussion of works. Let him show by his good behavior, his deeds. So the works that someone does not only reflects the faith they have, but also the way that they behave and their deeds, as the word it uses here, reflects their wisdom, which I think is really neat. So it's almost like he's linking faith and wisdom. Yeah. So many in the world today see faith as foolishness. The Bible tells us that, in these days that people will flip the script, so to speak, that things that are good are considered bad and considered evil, and things that are evil are considered good. Well, he's comparing here, he's likening faith to wisdom in a way here. Yeah. But the world thinks faith is foolishness.
Right.
And so it's interesting that we see him, how he does that. Mm-hmm. So,
great point.
So it's really a neat idea that how he does that there. But then the last phrase in the verse here is deep, and it makes me think of certain people. It brings to mind people when you think in the gentleness of wisdom.
It describes what wisdom is,
Yeah.
I think it's a great tone to capture wisdom, because somebody who's wise doesn't beat up somebody. Somebody who's wise doesn't take a hammer to their computer when it messes up on them.
Flip the tables.
Those are not acts of wisdom. So wise people are definitely gentle.
Well, and I think about things about the qualifications of elders. And, we want them to be wise and want them to be gentle. It puts those things in there. We want them to use their wisdom not as a hammer against somebody else, but as a way to draw them in. And I think it's just a great picture of what that's supposed to be. And then by reflecting back to chapter 1, it's those people are the ones, or really even several things earlier in this book, that the gentle, wise people are the ones that you want to be the teachers. So the ones that you want to learn from and you want to emulate. So I just really like that verse and the different things that he's talking about, just right in that one little verse. But then he goes into some contrast after that. So, you know, as a preacher, I know you love to see lists in there. You know, you preachers, you like the list. It's easy to make a sermon.
There's the sermon.
The sermon's done, your points are made.
I might preach this one, for sure.
So he kind of goes through a couple contrasting lists. You know, first about, you know, the negative side, and then at the end of the chapter here about the more positive fruits of wisdom and things like that. But let's go through the more negative sides here first. So why don't, Dale, if you'll read verse 14, 15, and 16.
But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This wisdom is not that which comes from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every evil thing.
So he kind of goes through, and we'll get to the second list in a minute, but he's going through what the commentary that I've been studying from here discusses as 7 traits of earthly wisdom.
Right.
So, you know, a lot of times when we look back at the book of Proverbs, as we referenced quite a bit, much of Proverbs is the difference between foolishness, earthly, you know, thoughts, and godly wisdom. So, James is sort of summing that up here in just a few short verses here.
Right.
So if we just kind of go through the different traits, he lists 7. So in verse 14, the first one is bitter jealousy or envy. You know, that's something that somebody that's worldly and thinks only on earthly things, you know, jealousy motivates a lot of what they do. Thinking back to the context of wisdom and faith motivating our actions, you know, what we've been talking about the last couple of chapters. You know, faith and works, wisdom and deeds and behavior here. So these are the type of things that motivate earthly actions,
right,
which manifest themselves as sin. So, you know, this first one, are your actions being motivated through jealousy? Bitter envyings, bitter jealousy, however your translation you know, renders that phrase right there. And going right along with it, he couples these two things, you know, selfish ambition. What, are you doing things only for yourself in a narcissistic way, or in a way that's not helping others and not doing service to others in any way? You know, are you thinking only about yourself in the actions that you do? The next one is arrogance. You know, going through, you know, am I boasting about stuff? Am I always just about me? Look at me, look at what all of my accomplishments, my things, and then lying against the truth. So, obviously lying, you know, self-explanatory,
right.
You know, bad things. So, how much of our actions are motivated by these things? And that's something we have to fight against. You know, these are things that are our natural inclination, potentially. We're going to get into that a little bit more when we in the discussion of our own personal earthly desires and lusts, and it talks about that later in the segment we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
But you know, how do we fight against letting our own, you know, earthly wants motivate us? And these are all ways that our earthly desires can motivate us,
right,
to different kinds of sinful action.
Yeah. A lot of times, you know, we talk about sin and it keeps us from Christ, and it does. This passage, James is talking about specific actions, you know, not the broad concept of sin, but hey, here's what's probably going on with you right now. And you need to pinpoint that, and you need to get away from it because it's not wise, you know. And so I really appreciate that here.
Yeah, it's like he's talking about the motivation behind those actions, not just the actions. I think a lot of times we look at the specific actions itself, and as this is the sin, but what's behind that sin? What's motivating that sin? You know, as we've talked about in this chapter quite a bit about what's in the heart, and you know, from the heart the tongue speaks. That's where that type of sin is motivated from. Here it discusses the selfish ambition as being in your heart. What are What are the thoughts behind the actions? What's motivating that? What's the source of it? You know, but we talk about treating the symptoms instead of the disease. So here James is going past the symptoms, and he's going, this is the disease. This is what's causing the symptoms of the acts of sin.
Yeah, selfishness, you know, that causes a lot, to say the least.
Well, and then he keeps going on in verse, 4 of them right there, verse 14, knocks them out of these 7 that we're talking about. And talking about this wisdom, referring to earthly wisdom or earthly thoughts, earthly motivations, not heavenly or godly. So it's not that which comes from above, but it's earthly, natural, demonic even. So it's not only, you know, we think about earthly as being our normal everyday existence here, natural, that kind of thing, but demonic, influenced by evil, influenced by Satan, influenced through hell. And you know, it's like those things seem to me to be taking it, you know, further and further in intensity here.
Yeah.
Earthly, natural, it's like it's ingrained in us, in our nature, but demonic, influenced by that, and not only that. And then in the last verse of our little section here, where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, this disorder and every evil thing. So these things are you know, motivated through all of that disorder. You know, Satan wants to inflict disorder on the world. I mean, it's, you know, that's his entire thing. Right? Just tear it down. And
if there's disorder in your life, it's probably because of these things. You know, if you're mourning your life, distraught in your life, it's probably because of one of these specific sins, the motivations to sin.
And by the way, the 5, 6, and 7 in my book's list here was the earthly, natural, and demonic influence there that we have. So we've covered that. So now we go to the other side of the coin. We go to what motivates our good works, what motivates our faith, what motivates these things. And then we get to the last couple of verses of the chapter here, starting with verse 17. It says, but the wisdom from above. Now this is contrasting to verse 15, the wisdom which does not come from above, you know, very clearly two opposite things. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, as we talked about before, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. And the seed whose fruit is righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Well, here are the 7 things, and we'll talk about each one of these. Here are the 7 things that are listed. Pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, it says in this case reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, which we talked about before, unwavering, and without hypocrisy. So let's talk about each one of those. First, pure. The wisdom from above, the basic characteristic it says is purity. And I just want to read this one little passage from the book here. It says, true wisdom is pure, free from iniquity and defilements, not allowing of any known sin, but studious of holiness, both in heart and life. From the word for holy and saint, purity is a basic concept of the Christian faith and an immutable quality of God. From this inner quality flow the outward manifestations given in the rest of the verse. It is free from envy, strife, and boasting. So, you know, pure, we're not, you know, we're thinking of pure wisdom. It's not influenced by all these other things.
It's not tainted.
It's not tainted by the earthly, natural, demonic. You know, any of these personal feelings of jealousy and ambition. It's pure. It's outside of those things. It's dedicated to the source of pureness, which is you know, God's word. That's where we can access purity. It's the only place we can access purity is through God's word. And we, when we start injecting our own thoughts and feelings and etc. into that, is when it starts to become impure. When it starts to become tainted in some way, like you mentioned, you know, tainted by our own personal desires, our own earthly enticements, things. And then peaceable. You know, first we start with purity. This reminds me of some of those things. I believe it's in Peter, or I don't remember what chapter it's in, where it's add to your faith this and this and this, and then or the fruits of the Spirit. This list kind of seems similar
Definitely,
to
yeah.
those things. This comes from following this type of wisdom. Follow earthly wisdom, it's all those things from before. Follow godly wisdom, and these are the things that manifest. These are the fruits, if you will, of that wisdom. Purity, being peaceable, being gentle, as we discussed already, from the first verse of this section. Being reasonable, just being willing to work with somebody else,
No kidding.
and want to stay away from arguments and stuff. We're going to get into that a little bit more in a couple verses into chapter 4. But full of mercy. We talked about that in one of the previous chapters too. Is someone being merciful to others and not just want to beat them over the head with their sins, but being merciful to them and bringing them into this wisdom. And of course, we're talking about all the good fruits. Unwavering. Another translation talks about that being without partiality or double-minded, like we talked about in the very first chapter, of how we treat people that come in, or we want to have unwavering doctrine, but we also want to deal with that in the spirit of gentleness and meekness and humility, which is discussed in chapter 4, and peaceable, merciful to people, and not just a stone statue that doesn't appeal to people. We bring them into Christ, not hope that they show up to where we are. We want to go to where they are and bring them into us. And then, of course, without hypocrisy. All of following this wisdom needs to be done in sincerity. We don't want to be someone that just says we're following it and goes about our business doing other things. And we even talked about that in one of the previous chapters too. Yeah. Love this way, summing it up here. All these previous things we talked about the double-minded man and the one that looks in the mirror and then sees one thing and then looks away and is somewhere different in a previous chapter of this book. And this is, that's a discussion, a description, I guess you could say, of hypocrisy. And, that type of hypocrisy has no place in this action of godly wisdom.
Right. Yeah, because people don't trust hypocrisy. People complain all the time. Well, I don't go to church because of hypocrites, And there's a fine line there. Are the people hypocrites, or are they sinners seeking Christ, seeking the truth? But when we admit that's where it kind of shows that we're not a hypocrite. I know I'm not perfect, but I'm here, trying to learn, trying to be better. That's who is a sinner, seeking the truth, seeking Christ.
Well, there's also a line, even this is a slight digression from this verse, but along those lines, we don't want to accept sin,
right?
Other than the fact of knowing that we are all sinners, and people that continue sinful behavior need to repent. Repentance is a big part of all this. And we can't just say, well, we're going to show you grace and mercy and be gentle with you, but go ahead sin it.
Yeah.
That's
be
not
proud of that sin.
Yeah, that's not what we're talking about.
No.
We want people to, acknowledge their own sin and do what needs to be done to turn away from that. The thing about that, when we say do what needs to be done, that repentance has to come from a mindset. And I think that's what James is really talking about in this, really in the whole book, is not only do the things like the Jews would have their checklist, but do the things because it's motivated by faith. It's motivated by godly wisdom. It talks about teaching these people, giving them the knowledge, giving them the experience to understand that they're sinners, want to do the things necessary to get out of that sin, but that's only done through the understanding of faith, the understanding of godly wisdom, and all the things that are fruits of that. And if someone's life is full of those fruits of evil, the fruits of earthly wisdom, as it talks about, then they got to make a change. That's what the church is here for. To show them that this is not the way to exist, to think,
Right.
to be, and this is the way, and then that leads you down a path. It's not, conversion is not a checklist. It is changing your mind to this so that then you do the things
Yes, there
that,
can be more changes.
that God tells us to do, you know. And then we do it in a peaceable way. Verse 18, and the seed whose fruit is righteousness, that's what we're trying to go. We're trying to have the fruits of righteousness here. That's our end goal, is sown in peace by those who make peace. And sometimes, as we mentioned in our announcements earlier, the seed can take a while to germinate.
Right.
You know, but we sow it in peace, knowing that maybe that seed blossoms a month from now, a year from now, 15 years from now.
Right.
You know, but we still have to sow the seed as we do. Looks like.
Whether the wrath of the storm tossed sea, or demons or men